India today is prepared for a massive coverage of the G20 summit. Run up to the G20 summit, there is massive preparation by the Indian administration, by where we are sitting today, the G20 Secretariat. And joining me for an exclusive conversation is the Sherpa of G20 for India, Amitabh Kant. Mr. Kant, many thanks for joining us here on India Today. Let's begin with the preparations. It's been a year of challenges. Would you consider this G20 to be the most challenging of all the G20s in the past, given that the circumstances have been such, the global challenges have been such, that India had to accommodate a lot of those concerns?
Yeah, you know, the challenges have been immense because this is the post-COVID era, and vast segments have gone below the poverty line. People have lost their jobs. You've had a huge crisis of climate action, climate finance. You know, close to 75 countries are facing a global debt crisis. The world is facing a recession. 1/3 of the world is in recession. And on top of all this, you have a geopolitical crisis which is going on for over a year and a half in Europe. So we are hosting the presidency in the midst of a vast number of challenges. But every challenge is a huge opportunity. And I think India used this as an opportunity to bring the voice of the Global South center stage.
We'll talk about the issues, but let's talk about the preparations itself. We see the G20 hoardings everywhere. Bharat Mandapam at Pragati Maidan is looking spectacular in terms of welcoming the delegates and the themes that you have for the sessions. If you could elaborate on what day one and day two of the summit are going to look like.
So the broad theme is around one Earth, one family, one future. But that'll encapsulate all the developmental work that India's presidency has done during the course of the year and all the key priorities that figure in it. But the broad themes of discussions will revolve around our motto of one Earth, one family, one future, and Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam. So I think we'll discuss a lot of key issues. We'll discuss the priorities. The leaders will all discuss. The Prime Minister, who's the leader of G20, his vision is that India's presidency should be inclusive, it should be decisive, it should be ambitious and action-oriented. So our objective throughout the year was to live up to that vision, and we've tried to have a very action-oriented agenda through the different ministerials all through the year.
Over 200 meetings, around 50 cities. What was the purpose and objective of bringing the whole country in, and was it to reach out to the people? And do you think, in your appreciation, that this entire program and plan has been able to reach out to the people of India?
So India's G20 presidency has been very different from any other country. I think in most countries, G20 is restricted to one city or the capital city. The Prime Minister's view was that it should be taken to the states of India. So we took it to every state, every union territory. We took it to every school, college, university. We took it to the people of India. And this has been a people's presidency. The cities were improved, the states participated through culture, through their art forms, through their one district, one product. And we did a number of model G20s in schools, their essays, their contests, there are many, many other things all through. So this has been really about involving citizens, and this is the first time that we've been able to take foreign policy, diplomacy, issues of G20 right to the common citizen of India.
During the Bali summit, the leaders were taken to a forest to plant trees. What's India planning in terms of maybe showing a place and to give out that message on climate change, planting of trees? Also anything special for the spouses of the heads of state and heads of government who are coming?
So, you know, this is actually a very business-focused, the leaders meeting to discuss global issues. And our priorities are very important. So we would like to remain focused all through the 2 days. The spouses will go to the Agricultural Research Institute in Pusa to see the unique work India has done in the field of millets. They will go to the National Gallery of Modern Art to see a number of displays there on India's art forms and India's handloom, textiles, many other things. But the leaders would remain focused on largely on the business and issues of development.
Okay. But is there a Rajghat?
The leaders would be going to the Rajghat to send a message of peace, and all the leaders would go there.
Let's now come to the nitty-gritties of the meetings. There are challenges when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine war, when it comes to China's objections to none other than Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which is a tagline India has used everywhere. There are certain other areas in terms of language that could be a concern that China has raised objections to. How are you navigating these, the language in the document, and are you confident of a joint communique?
So, there are some issues of, like China raising the issues of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, etc. We discuss with them. They've raised a number of issues. We discuss with them. We sort it out. China is a multilateral player. It may have bilateral issues, but it is a multilateral player. And I think with discussion, we should be able to convince them. We are in that process of convincing them on a range of issues. And we are very optimistic and we are very hopeful that we'll sort out all these issues. That is really the Sherpa's job. On the issue of Ukraine, let me just say very clearly that it's not our creation. It's not the creation of developing countries and the global south and the emerging markets at all. The issues of importance to us are developmental issues of inclusive growth, of progress, of financial inclusion, many of these developmental issues which are our key priorities. And we have throughout the year focused on those developmental issues. We've been ambitious about transforming the world as far as growth and development is concerned. War is not a priority for us.
Certainly not a top priority for a G20 grouping, but the West is going to come with that entire agenda, keeping Ukraine and Russia on the table. With Putin not in the room and Sergei Lavrov representing Russia, how will that impact the conversations?
Well, I think we should first discuss and sort out all the developmental issues and then come to that issue. I think that issue will be discussed and debated at the Sherpa's meeting, the geopolitical issues, and we'll see what best we can do. Our attempt will be to bring everybody around like we had done in Bali. India had played a key role. We'll do our best, but beyond that, I don't think we should be worried about it. Our focus should be to push the ambitious agenda forward. I think let us not get over-obsessed with Ukraine. Let us drive the developmental agenda.
That's a good point you make, but what about the joint communique? Are you confident that India will be, under its presidency, be able to get a joint communique with consensus, or is there a middle ground with footnotes, chairman's summary included?
No, on all.
How are you looking at it?
On all growth, development, progress, issues of global south, all these issues will get a consensus.
And there will be a communique.
Of course, there will be a communique and all these developmental issues. I don't know about Ukraine, but all other developmental issues will get a consensus. We'll move forward.
So all the development issues will have consensus and there will be a joint communique. We'll have to wait and see on whether there are going to be footnotes on others, other issues or not.
No, on our priority is development.
Yes.
Our ambition is development. All those issues will move forward.
In terms of conversations, are we looking at some stunningly important bilaterals on the sidelines that Prime Minister Modi will be focusing on? And what do you make of the invitations that he's given? We know that there are member states, there are those who've been invited. What was the thinking and the thought behind inviting the countries that India has invited this time around?
So India is invited, normally you invite the G20 countries and then you invite a number of other countries, which is a regular practice. Past presidencies have done it. India has invited a number of 9 other countries which are critical players, particularly countries from Africa, countries from our neighborhood, countries from Middle East, some of these 9 countries which are India's partners in a range of areas and which are critical to the global decision making. And for them also, they've been very greatly involved throughout our G20 presidency.
Is that also to focus on and send out a message to the world on the global south that India is the voice of the global south and their concerns are not just going to be put on the table, but they're being invited so they can share those concerns themselves?
I think, Geeta, the real highlight of our presidency has been that we started with the Prime Minister meeting all the leaders of the Global South, 125 leaders, hearing them out, bringing out their priorities, and then shaping our priorities based on those inputs that he received. So our priorities are a reflection of the Global South. And throughout our presidency, we've acted like the voice of the Global South. And to my mind, that's very important, because this year, the IMF has said that 80% of the global growth is going to come from the Global South. If 80% of the growth is coming from Global South, and it says that next 2 decades, 2/3 of the growth is going to come from developing countries, that means you need to lay emphasis on this. You need to reorient the world's financial architecture, the world's financial institutions, to ensure that this growth is accelerated, because the demographics in these countries is very young, unlike the aging population in other parts of the world.
Again, Prime Minister Modi in his interview to Business Today spoke of debt restructuring, sovereign debts, and a real need to reform MDBs, multilateral development banks. How are you as the Sherpa, how have you taken that vision, that idea forward, and ensure that the G20 actually focuses on reforms and debt restructuring?
So both of them figure very prominently in the finance track of our discussion, but multilateral development institutions, about making these banks far more bigger, better, more effective, and ensuring that their resources flow into these developing markets, that they are able to bring new instruments of blended finance, first loss guarantees, credit enhancement, is all very important, because they do direct lending right now. They need to move to indirect lending so that they can do 15x more lending to these emerging markets. That is really the key to further growth and progress. It's not just their balance sheet, but the ability to bring private sector, pension funds, sovereign wealth fund, all to invest in emerging markets is really the key to the future growth and progress of the world.
China is an important country when it comes to global supply chains. Prime Minister Modi, as also many other world leaders, now have been focusing on resilient supply chains and alternatives, where India is going to play a very important role. How has that really fit into the G20 agenda, where India is pushing itself as a country of the future, for the future, in terms of supply chains? And how do you look at it vis-a-vis China?
No, so the global value chains have been extensively discussed in our trade ministers' meeting. The issue of ensuring that they get more and more resilient, that they are able to move closer to the points of production. All this has been discussed to a great extent. And how do you ensure that they get decentralized, MSMEs become a major player? These are very major recommendations which you'll find in the place in the Leaders' Declaration.
Just ahead of the summit would be the 4-day Sherpa meeting, which is going to be quite exhaustive. Yeah. What's the agenda for those meetings? Will the fine nitty-gritties of the documents be put to rest, laid out over there in the meeting?
No, so it'll be very hectic. Every word is fought for. We are doing negotiations for the last 20 days from 2 p.m. in the afternoon to 2 a.m. in the night. So every word is fought for. Every single sentence is fought for. And therefore, when we meet physically, we've left around a couple of issues to be discussed and sorted out. But we are very hopeful that we'll be able to convince people at a personal level to arrive at a big agenda forward. Everyone wants the world to move forward. Everyone wants the leaders to push for growth. Everyone wants the leaders to push for climate action. Everyone wants digital transformation through the digital public infrastructure. So during the course of the year, we've been able to push a lot of India narrative. We've been able to push a lot of India's development story. And we've been able to push a lot of the world, what the world needs for growth and progress.
G20 is a huge grouping, but it's not a cohesive one, especially on climate change. India's position, especially to do with being the voice of the global south, is very different from the developed nations. How are the countries coming together? This meeting comes ahead of the COP28, and we still see no consensus on climate change. In fact, if we see reticence from the West when it comes to doing more for all the first movers advantage that they had. So how is that? How are you trying to manage bringing that together?
By being very skillful, because we've not occupied the carbon space. The developed world has occupied almost 90% of the carbon space. They have peaked. They took about 70 to 100 years to peak. A country like India is going to peak in 30 years. We need developmental space to be able to lift our population above poverty line. We need to grow in the next 3 to 4 decades. And therefore, it's important to tell them that they are responsible for all this carbonization in the world. We've done more than what was required. We're the only country which achieved its NDC targets 9 years ahead. We're the only G20 country to figure in the top 10 of the Clean Climate Index. We've been very ambitious. We've driven development with climate action. No other country has been able to do that. So we'll be bold, we'll be aggressive, we'll take a tough stance.
A very important proposal by India has been to invite the African Union to become a member of the G20. Where did this idea come from? Where's the inception of the idea of having African Union as part of the G20?
So this was the PM's vision, PM's perspective, his vision, his outlook that India must be the voice of the global South. And PM had spoken about this earlier in Bali as well. And the first thing he did was that he wrote to all the leaders of G20 that India would like AU to be a permanent member. And that has had a very positive and overwhelming response. The issue is being discussed, but broadly there's been a very good response to the PM's proposal. It's his vision, his perspective.
But where did the conversation really come from? The concerns about China's influence in African nations, how will that impact the G20? Did that come up when African Union was being discussed?
No, the PM was very clear that we have to, because after all they comprise of 55 countries and you need to make G20 far more inclusive. G20, it's not like G7, it comprises of both developed and developing countries and emerging countries. Look at Africa, 6 of the fastest growing 12 nations are from Africa now. So you need to make them a part. If the world is going to grow that side, if the world is going to grow in these regions, then you need to make them a part of G20.
And before I end this interview, when we talk about developed nation and India's vision of becoming a developed nation, it's not about just becoming a major trillion-dollar economy. It's also about standard of life of the people. The disparity continues when it comes to the rich and the poor in India. How is India looking at bridging that gap to become really developed, where each and every human being in India, citizen of India, has a certain standard of life?
So during the last 8 years, if you look at it, India has built about 40 million houses. It's built about 110 million toilets. It's provided piped water connection to 253 million citizens. It's built 55,000 kilometers of road. It provided COVID vaccines to 2.2 billion people. And today we do about 46% of the real-time fast payments in the world. So it's push for inclusivity, it's push for growth. When we started the Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana, only 17% of the women had bank accounts. Today, 86% of the women have bank accounts. Look at the jump we've made because of Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana. And all of them have liquidity in their bank accounts. These are some of the biggest achievements anywhere in the world. And that is why the Bank of Indian International Settlement said that what India has achieved in 8 years, would have taken India 50 years to achieve.
In terms of deliverables, what are the big deliverables you're looking at? We have had the Bali summit, but in terms of movement on the things that were discussed, there has hardly been any real forward movement. What are the deliverables?
So big deliverables in terms of an SDG action plan, in terms of lifestyle for sustainability, in terms of climate action, in terms of digital public infrastructure, in terms of a range of areas which will finally find a place for the leaders meeting. It's for the leaders to take a final call. It's for the Prime Minister to finally convince all the leaders, and I'm quite hopeful and quite sure that we'll see results we'll see very bold, very aggressive, very ambitious action during our presidency.
Final question. in terms of receiving the guests and hosting the guests, what are we looking at? What is the Indianness that you're going to bring to the table when it comes to gifts and when it comes to food?
Well, that's for the PM to decide, because after all, the gifts will go for him. But let me tell you that throughout the whole year, we have used only one district, one product. And throughout the year, the cultural component has all been from the state governments. And we'll continue to focus on one district, one product, because that benefits our common artisans.
And food?
Food will be very Indian. I mean, totally Indian.
Absolutely Indian.
Absolutely.
All right. On that note,
it's the Prime Minister's choice. It's he's the leader. The Prime Minister takes a call on all this, but the food will obviously be very Indian.
Well, on that note, Mr. Kant, wishing you all the best. You have only just about a week to go before the delegates start arriving. So wishing you and wishing India all the best for this G20 presidency and the summit.